All right, welcome everyone. I know participants are still coming into our virtual room, so we'll get started in just a minute. But if you're here for Fearless HR and the amazing insights and observations of Melanie Herman from the Nonprofit Risk Management Center, then you are not only in the right place, but you are in for a treat, because this is a very timely presentation that we have for you. Some really great thoughts about some opportunities that we can take in terms of shoring up some of our HR functions. So we'll just give folks another few seconds here to come in before we get started. And while we're doing that, just want to direct everyone to the chat function. I'm sure you all are familiar. This isn't your first Zoom rodeo, I'm quite sure. But if you do keep an eye on the chat, we'll be posting some comments there. You're certainly welcome. We want you to participate in the discussion. If you do have any audio or connection issues, please email my colleague Denise Waits, D-Waits, D-W-A-I-T-S, at communityactionpartnership.com, and she'll help you troubleshoot those. And if you're able to just chat directly, you can also use the private chat to do that. And we are recording today's webinar, and the slides and the recording will be made available to everyone within a couple of days. So I see that our participant numbers have kind of leveled off, and folks may continue to join, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So let me start by saying good afternoon, Community Action. I echo my greetings from my colleague, Mary Beth Schneber-Remrev, in the chat. Welcome to this webinar. Again, this is our webinar called Fearless HR, How to Reinvent Recruitment, Retention, and Employee Engagement in a Post-Pandemic World. And one thing that we've heard loud and clear in our travels throughout the network and in our conversations with many of you is that this is a really, really challenging time in the field of HR. Staff burnout, trying to keep staff engaged, trying to keep staff, and keeping them from maybe looking for an opportunity where they feel they can grow more. We want them to grow in community action because we have opportunities. And then, of course, recruiting staff. There's so much going on. And fortunately, we have some really great tips and insights into this. So with no further ado, I'd like to turn things over to Melanie Lockwood Herman from the Nonprofit Risk Management Center. Melanie is one of our great partners, and her organization, her website have a bunch of resources. And so please check out their website, and we'll provide more information in the chat as we go. So Melanie, take it away.
Thank you so much, Aaron. It's my pleasure to be here today and to have a chance to talk about HR and share some of the things I'm thinking about, some of the things I'm learning. And you'll see that I want to challenge you to do things a little differently in the remaining months of 2022 and next year as well. And I want to share a whole bunch of ideas, things that are running through my head and that I'm thinking about and talking about and trying to inspire leaders to embrace. On this first slide, you'll see not only my name, but my email address and my phone number. I want you to know that sometimes when we talk about employment issues, whether it be, recruitment, engagement, retention, even separation, these issues can be sensitive. I want you to know that you can call me for a one-on-one conversation. There's no charge for that conversation. We offer that consultation as part of what we call risk help. And it's available to anyone affiliated with Community Action because the National Community Action Partnership is a member of the Nonprofit Risk Management Center. So there's no cost, and you can call me and pose a hypothetical. You can call me and we can chat about an actual situation you're managing through. Please know that I'm here to help and I want to help you. And I so appreciate and look forward to speaking to leaders from this incredible community. Let me just advance to the next slide. Here we go. just a bit short piece for you to read. All right, a little bit about the Nonprofit Risk Management Center. So we are a 30-year-old organization that was founded to help nonprofit leaders. We are a nonprofit as well, and we work to help leaders across the sector really understand and get comfortable with the risks they face so they can take more risk. And I think that theme for NRMC fits really well with this topic of fearless HR, because you want to understand how to best manage the people on your team so you can take more risk in hiring and really take more risk in your employment practices. So for this afternoon, I've divided the content into 4 sections. We're going to start with what I'm calling HR relics and realities. I want to kind of get us grounded with some things that are happening, some things that we know to be true, that will lead us into talking about how do we rethink HR? How do we do things differently? How do we reimagine our approach? And I want to continue with some practical steps, and I'll share a whole bunch and see what you think. I'm kind of taking a risk by putting them in front of you, not knowing how you're going to react. And then I want to close with some final thoughts and takeaways, in some cases inspired by things that I'm reading. And I slowed down my pace of reading over the last few months, but I just this last weekend picked it up again, and I'm in the middle of a really fantastic book about hybrid workplaces, and I've got something I want to share from that book. I haven't even finished it yet. So I want to start with actually a reference to a book. Some of you may have heard of this gentleman. He's an actor and comedian by the name of Josh Peck. He starred in a show called Drake and Josh. It was a television show that my daughter loved when she was in elementary school. She used to really enjoy the comedy in the show and the interplay between these 2 characters. So he published this book earlier this year, Happy People Are Annoying, and it kind of sucked me in. I love the title. It's such a strange title to me. Happy People Are Annoying? How can that be? So I bought the book, and I recognized the name of the author as being the actor from this television show. The book is about a very challenging childhood, and then how he landed this incredible acting job as a star of a television show. And then the arc of his life continues when he started to face some serious struggles and challenges. After the television show ended, he was facing addiction and he was in treatment. And so his life really was quite tumultuous. Well, at one point, he was going to regular meetings, going to support meetings for one of his addictions. And he had a close friend who had really recommended that he start going to these meetings, thought that these meetings would help him. And after one of the meetings, his friend said to him, was that meeting helpful? Did you get a lot out of the meeting today? And Josh Peck's answer to his friend was, not really. I went through the whole meeting and I've been to a bunch of these meetings, but this one tonight, I don't think I got a lot out of it. It didn't feel like it was for me. And his friend said something to him that really hit home. His friend said, well, that's because the entire meeting isn't for you. It's for the group. And so if you only took away 5% from tonight's meeting, then that's how it's supposed to be. That's great, because the rest of the meeting was for everybody else. And so I share this sentiment from this book, Happy People Are Annoying, because I think sometimes when we come to webinars and we go to conferences, we're kind of hoping that the entire piece will be relevant to us, the entire program, the entire workshop. But what instead we should be doing is looking for that 5%, looking for that one tip, that one suggestion, that one idea, or maybe 2 ideas, if I'm lucky today, that resonate, that sound like they might be something you're willing to do. So I want to challenge you to find that 5% in today's presentation, because I'm going to share a lot of ideas. And I promise you, some of them are going to feel unrealistic. Some are going to feel too risky. But I really believe there will be a couple that you're going to be curious enough about that you're going to be willing to try them. All right, let's start with HR, relics, and realities. What are the dinosaurs? What are the things that are holding us back, that are dated, that we need to rethink? So I've got a list of some relics on this next slide. The first is ghosting applicants. This is something that employers have been doing since the dawn of time, which is not replying to everybody who applies for a job at your organization. I want you to rethink this. What does it do for your reputation as an organization when 100 people apply and you only write back to the 3 or 4 that you're going to interview? That means 97 people didn't hear back from you. 97 people have walked away with a negative impression of your organization. Some of those people are facing anxiety because they're wondering, are they going to get a phone call any day? All of us know somebody who's been in the job market in recent years. And we also know that in those job searching periods of high stress and anxiety, many applicants are just waiting to hear back, right? They believe they've applied for the perfect job. I'm perfectly suited for this job. Why aren't they calling me? So I want us to resolve to stop ghosting applicants. I want us to resolve to reply to every single person who applies. It's not hard to do. You can do a kind of a nice, polite, kind, gentle email and send it to a large group using BCC. So there are lots of ways to do it. It doesn't take a lot of time. It's not hard to do. It's a relic of HR from years past. Something else we're still doing in many cases is collecting resumes and cover letters. Resumes and cover letters. These are 2 of the least helpful things you could possibly collect from an applicant. I want to encourage you to use an application instead, and to use a custom application for each opening, for each position. Many of the questions will be the same, but your application should be suited to the position. So if you're hiring someone to be a supervisor, a manager, or a leader, you should include some supervisory management leadership questions. If you're hiring somebody for a frontline role, you shouldn't include those questions. It's not hard to create a custom application. Resumes are very difficult to compare, right? They're apples and oranges, and many people don't even write their own resumes. They hire someone to do it. I know because I used to write resumes as a service that I offered at one of the associations I worked at. I actually created this service called the Black Hat, the Top Hat Resume Service, the Top Hat Resume Service. And I would rewrite people's resumes. I would send them a beautiful box with their resumes and beautiful stationery they could use for their cover letters. And I would sometimes even draft cover letters for them. Another relic of HR from the before times is where a hiring manager decides who they're going to hire, and then they bring in a team of people to do a second interview to kind of validate the manager's decision. I want you to, if you're still doing that, I want you to flip-flop that. I want the team to do the interview first. I want the team to tell the supervisor, the manager, the executive, the leader, who they think is best positioned. I want to flip-flop that process and have the team that will be working with the new person interview them first, and then the leader interview last. And then the last relic I wanted to mention is checking references at the very end of the process. Most employers still do this. We check references after we've already made a decision to hire somebody, we've made a conditional offer of employment, and we check references. Sometimes we do a background check at that point. But checking references at the end really doesn't make sense, because a reference check is an opportunity to hear from someone other than the candidate about the candidate. So it's really your only chance to get an objective view about somebody's suitability for a job, suitability for your organization. It's the only chance, because everything else you're getting is coming straight from the candidate, who is biased, right? They're biased in favor of themselves. That reference check is the most valuable screening tool in the screening toolkit. It's the most important of all the screening tools. And yet many of us wait until the very end. And if we're not able to check references, we give up. It's not only possible to check references and obtain helpful information, but it's possible to do it early in the process before you've even met the person, which is the way we do it here at NRMC. It's also possible to give references, and to give references in a safe and effective manner. I have an article that I've written about giving and getting references safely and effectively. If you want to receive that, please send me an email. I'd be happy to send it to you. All right, a couple of chilling realities. And this is from, these two are from a book that I just finished over the weekend called I Love It Here. It's by Clint Pulver. And Clint Pulver started a company called the Undercover Millennial. And he decided to provide this service where he would go into businesses and interview millennial workers and find out why they love it or why they hate where they work. And he would gather the information and share it with management. And so he's written this book all about what he discovered in the undercover millennials. So two findings from his work in this business I thought were chilling and relevant. The first is the idea that over half of your workforce is ready to bounce the moment something better comes along. Half of your workforce is ready to bounce. Now, some of you are thinking, no, that can't be true. Maybe 10%, maybe 20%. I think we have to reorient ourselves to realizing that loyalty and that the idea of staying in an organization for 10, 20, 30 years is pretty rare these days. And why wouldn't somebody leave if something better came along? What advice would you give to a family member, to your child, your grandchild, your sister, brother, right? Best friend, if they told you that a better job came along? All of us would say, go for it. Go for that new job that offers better pay, benefits, workplace culture, opportunities to learn. Each of us would tell a friend or a family member that they should move on to something better. So of course, that's what our people are going to do if something better comes along. And then the other finding that I thought was so interesting and really validates what I've read from other experts in this field is that if people can't grow in their roles, they're going to leave and grow somewhere else. That the desire to grow, the desire to learn is common to all generations of workers. So from the 20-somethings to the 70-somethings on your team, each one of your employees wants to learn. They want to grow. They want to be better tomorrow than they are today. And so as leaders of organizations, we have to be obsessed about providing opportunities to learn and to grow. And if we don't, people are going to leave and go grow somewhere else. A couple more chilling realities. My sense, and this is from talking to HR leaders, CEOs across a wide variety of nonprofits, my sense is that we're managing recruitment, retention, and engagement using the same processes that were in place before the pandemic. We're using these kind of antiquated processes, and we have all sorts of excuses for doing that. We've changed other things, right? We've changed how we screen people coming into our offices. We've changed meeting protocols. We've changed our rules about hybrid work, but we're still kind of hanging on to some of these old school tools and strategies related to in the HR realm. And we use bandwidth as an excuse, right? We use bandwidth. We're too busy. We have too many things on our plates. And as a result, instead of making radical changes, which is what I want you to think about doing, we tweak, right? We tweak, and we also get caught in tunnels. And I want to talk a little bit more about tunneling. We're also fearful of experimenting. We're fearful of innovation. And when I think about why that is, there's really only one reason that comes to mind, and I see it all the time. It's fear of failure, fear of mistakes. We don't want to mess up. We don't want to expose our agencies to litigation. We don't want to be wrong, right? We don't want to cause offense. And so we're very fearful in our HR practices. And I think the time has come for us to be more fearless. We need to be more fearless, and we need to really try and do things differently if we want different outcomes. So as you think about bandwidth, this idea that we're too busy to do things differently, I was reminded of this quote from Dan Heath's book, Upstream. And the book is all about how many of us tend to solve problems downstream. And he starts the book by talking about a trip where he's picking up litter that is at the edge of this stream. And he's picking up this litter and he's putting it in a trash bag. And he goes back day after day to retrieve this litter. And then at some point realizes, where is this litter coming from, right? Where is this litter coming from? And when he goes upstream, he realizes that there's a source. There's a place where all of this litter is getting dumped into the river. And that if we could only deal with the source of the problem, we wouldn't have to deal with the problem downstream. And he shares this idea that when we experience scarcity, so when we're busy, right, we don't have enough time, we don't have enough financial resources, the problem is not that the big problems take up our time and we don't have time for the little problems. The real harm is that the little issues consume our time and we don't have time and bandwidth for the big ones. We need to flip that around. You should be focused on the most significant issues facing your agency. And I have a hunch that some of those issues have to do with filling positions, of keeping your team engaged, of replacing people that have left, of improving the way that you onboard, that you supervise, that you encourage and support people in their roles. So instead of making these radical changes and making these important changes that would make our organizations better, stronger, and more resilient, we tend to tweak. The definition of tweaking is improving by making just fine adjustments, just small adjustments. And that's what we do, right? We invite an extra person to be part of the interview panel. Well, we've changed our interviewing process. We have one more person who's going to join the interview process. We've added one new question to the list of interview questions. We're checking 3 references instead of 2. We do a lot of tweaking. We've changed a few questions on our performance management process, our annual process, right? We've added some goal setting to it. So there are lots of things that each of us has done to tweak our HR policies and practices. But I want you to just self-reflect and ask, have we made any really bold changes? Have we done something really bold and has it made a difference? Or was it a wonderful experiment that we've learned from? What did we learn? So in addition to tweaking, we also wind up tunneling. And this is a concept from Simon Sinek's book, which is called The Ultimate Game. And it's interesting. He talks about this idea that when we're trying to juggle a lot of problems, one of the things that we often do is we focus narrowly and we wind up in a tunnel where we're just pushing ahead and trying to get something done. And we're starting to disregard and pay less attention to our environment, to things that are changing around us, to opportunities, to the complex and dynamic environment that we live in. And he says, tunneling is a barrier to upstream thinking, right? To dealing with the cause of a problem rather than the consequences of a problem, because it causes us to be reactive and it winds up being a trap, right? We're in this endless cycle of reacting to things. And he uses this expression, tunneling begets more tunneling. I have a hunch that you're doing some tunneling in some aspect of your human resources, and I want you to think a little bit about what that is and an example of that. I mentioned that I think we're fearful of experimentation and innovation because we're afraid of making mistakes. We're afraid of making mistakes. And yet we know that when we're in this difficult time, in this very challenging time where the world has been upended and where we're facing a new set of circumstances left and right, we've got changing economic circumstances, socio-political issues, cultural issues, issues related to staff engagement and funding sources, and just so many things going on at once. This period that feels a bit chaotic. We need to stop and realize that in a period of chaos, when things are really stressful and coming at us from different directions, there's both risk, but there's also opportunity. This is a prime time to change things up. People are more willing to accept and to believe and to support changes in process when things are feeling a bit crazy and unwieldy or chaotic. So you're going to find that there's never been a better time. If it was smooth sailing with very low turnover and no vacancies, it wouldn't really make sense to tune up HR practices. It wouldn't make sense to make some really bold changes in your HR practices. But because things are feeling a bit chaotic, it's actually the perfect time to do just that. So the number one behavior that drives innovation is curiosity. So my team has just finished a series of DEI workshops, and one of the most compelling messages that I took away from that training was the idea of remembering to replace judgment with curiosity, to lead with curiosity. And so I've even put a little reminder on my monitor, curiosity instead of judgment. Curiosity is what will lead us to more innovative practices in HR. And so I want you to think about, how do I question the status quo, right? How do I ask questions and engage with others to really poke at and explore what we're currently doing and why it's not working? So you might ask a question such as, what if we tried this? Or how might we do that? I also want to encourage you to do your best to avoid shutting down fresh ideas, to avoid closing out ideas that come from members of your team that you haven't heard before. Instead of saying, that's not how things work here, or we tried that back in the 1990s and it didn't work. I've actually said that a few times. I regret saying it, but I have said it. Instead of saying that, I want you to say, how would that work? How would that work exactly? So really encourage people to explore their ideas and to frame those ideas and help you understand those ideas and withhold judgment. Lead with curiosity. I think part of that really requires, being committed to solving problems versus finding fault. It's always easy to find fault. We find fault with ourselves. We find fault with others, right? It's very easy to be a critic. It's much, much harder to be a problem solver and to solve those upstream problems. And then this last bullet point is from this terrific book, Eat, Sleep, Innovate. This is one of my favorite reads of the year thus far. And the authors say that we should be perpetually paranoid about the future. Well, when I first read that, it made no sense to me. One of the things I tell people that I meet for the first time is, I'm the most, a lawyer that's not paranoid. You've never met a lawyer who's less paranoid than I am. I'm just not paranoid. I leave my front door open. I'm not paranoid. But what they're talking about is not that kind of visceral paranoia. They're talking about this sense of wonder. Being perpetually paranoid about the future is just being willing to say, I don't know what's going to happen. It's almost more about being humble about the future. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what he or she is going to do. I don't know if a third or more of my staff are about to jump ship, right? I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen in the economy. Because I don't know, I have to think through what my plans are. What's my backup plan? What's my approach? Is what I'm doing the best approach, given that I don't know what's going to happen? I think that's what being perpetually paranoid about the future is all about. All right, I also want to talk a little bit about experimentation. We're going to get ready to shift into some of my ideas, the things I want you to try. In his book, Think Again, Adam Grant really challenges us to change our minds about things, to think about issues differently as we acquire more information. So the book is a wonderful reminder to be constantly in learning mode, to really resolve to be a learn-it-all versus a know-it-all. And as you acquire new information, new insights, as you learn things, update your thinking, update your approach. He also says something that I think is really valuable for nonprofit leaders, which is that we should abandon best practices. And some of you are thinking, that makes no sense. That makes no sense. Best practices are what we're trying to do. We're trying to be the best we can be, right? But he says that best practices suggest that ideal routines are already in place. And the truth is that ideal routines may have been in place 2 years ago, but the routines that are going to work today, the procedures, the approach, the way of doing business, the way of managing people today is probably a bit different from what made sense 2 years ago, 3 years ago. The world around us is changing all the time. We live in this incredibly complex and dynamic landscape that is constantly shifting. We can't dig in and stick with these best practices. The other thing he says that I share on this slide is this idea that sometimes we evaluate outcomes or success based on how something turned out. So if we posted a position opening, we recruited, and we hired a candidate, and that person turned out to be the best person ever, right? Fantastic individual, perfectly suited for the job. Very few of us would say, let's go back and look at that process. Let's unpack that process and understand what happened, and could we improve it the next time? Most of us would say, we hired a great person. They're just ideal. So let's just stick with that approach. That's how my brain works, right? Keep repeating the things that worked, stop the things that didn't work. Adam Grant reminds us to think again by saying, wait a second, what was the process, right? He says a bad process with a good outcome is luck. A good process with a bad outcome might be a smart experiment. It's a really interesting thing to think about. I encourage you to reflect on that. What process in your HR function should you be unpacking and thinking about and maybe re-engineering, even if the outcome was good? And what process is worth unpacking, understanding, rethinking that you abandoned because the outcome was bad? All right, I want to talk about, let's see here, forward. There we go. I want to talk about creating 2 lists. I want you to create a list of things you're going to stop doing, and I want you to create a list of things you're going to start doing. And the reason this is important is that in order to start doing some new things, you have to make space. You have to make space. You can't keep adding on to your list of things to do, to your workload. We've all tried that. It doesn't work. At some point, we burn out. So you've got to identify those things you're going to stop doing. And this section is all about being fearless in HR. So I want you to be focused on those HR people-related things. What are some things that don't work, or where the process did not work? The process, had some terrible flaws to it or can't be fixed. What are some things we've been doing forever that no longer have a good return on investment? How are we pretending to know how things are going to turn out, pretending we have a crystal ball? Let's stop doing that. Now, let's start doing some new things. Let's identify something that we're willing to try. Let's identify something that's a bold experiment, something that's risky, something that may not turn out well, but we're willing to try it because there's a learning opportunity. And I want you to think about, if we're going to make some changes in HR, maybe there are 2 or 3 that I mentioned today that you're intrigued by and you want to consider trying. I want you to think of them as a portfolio. So if you were investing money, many of us would not invest everything we have in highly risky cryptocurrency, right? Many of us would not put everything we have under the mattress, right? In what we feel like is a pretty safe investment. No earnings, but feels safe because I'm sleeping on it every night, right? Most of us might try a little bit in a safe investment, some in a moderately risky investment, and maybe a few dollars in something that feels kind of risky. That's a portfolio approach to investing. I want you to think about your HR practices in the same way. I want you to think about, what can we do in HR that's pretty darn safe? We know it's going to work. What are we going to do that feels a little risky? We're trying something, we're experimenting a bit, we're being innovative. And then what are we doing in HR that's really bold? Like, this may not work, but the bottom line is we're going to learn something by doing it. So that helps you create this kind of portfolio of HR approaches. All right, the last thing I want you to start doing on this list is I want you to think about the platinum rule. So many of you are familiar with the golden rule. The golden rule is one that I've written about, I've taught. I thought it was the heartbeat of employment practices. I was totally convinced that it was the way to kind of everything builds on the golden rule. The golden rule is the idea that you should treat other people as you would want to be treated in return. So it's a concept, it's a philosophy, it's a value common to many different faith traditions. People understand it, the golden rule: treat others the way you want to be treated. And for decades, I thought this should be the centerpiece of human resources for all nonprofits. And if I were doing this webinar 10 years ago, I would have talked about the golden rule. Well, a couple of years ago, one of my team told me about something called the platinum rule. I'd never heard of this. It's a new rule. How could it be better than the golden rule? But since the pandemic, I've come to realize that the platinum rule makes perfect sense right now. The platinum rule tells us that we should treat others the way they want to be treated. Not the way I want to be treated, the way they want to be treated. That's the platinum rule. And that is one of the most compelling lessons that I have learned from the pandemic. I would prefer that everybody who works at the Nonprofit Risk Management Center work 8:30 to 5:30 here in the office. That's what I would prefer. But what I've discovered is that doesn't work for everybody else. That's not what other people prefer. That's what I prefer. And just because it's good for me doesn't mean it's good for other people. And if I insist on what's good for me, I'm going to be working here all by myself. So the pandemic has really taught us that with respect to human resources, we need to afford people the respect. We need to refer to them in the way they want to be referred to, right? We want to use those personal pronouns that they prefer, and we need to treat them the way they want to be treated. And that's a huge change for me, at least, in philosophy. And yet I think it's a great concept to ground your HR practices in. The platinum rule. All right, let's move on and talk about some additional proactive and practical steps to really change up your human resource practices and be more fearless with respect to HR. The first is going back to something I said at the outset, which is no more ghosting applicants. I want you to show applicants incredible respect. I want you to agree that you're going to reply to everybody who applies, even someone who applies for a job for which they are completely unqualified, or they send you just an application or a cover letter and resume for a job that doesn't exist. I want you to let people know where they stand. I want you to let them know if they're moving on to that next stage in your process. Be respectful, right? Everybody who applies wants to hear back from you. They want to hear good news, but they want to hear any news. And I want you to commit to providing that. I also want you to think about whether you can shift your focus from mainly screening people out to screening people in, right? To looking to hire people who are a good fit for your mission, for a particular role, for both the mission of the organization and the role, who are eager to learn, right? Who want to learn, who want to grow into a role, who bring some skills, but they're not perfection. They are individuals who really have the opportunity to grow as part of your team. And as you fill positions, I want you to step back from that narrow position to what's best for this organization. Is this person really contributing to the diversity of the team overall, to the diversity of backgrounds and life experiences and so forth? Are we hiring for the organization? I also want you to think about whether you're making a commitment to internal mobility. Are you developing talent? One of the things that I've seen in some agencies recently is this inclination to just promote people without doing any talent development. So someone's been here for 5 years, time to get promoted, right? Or we have an opening in the next level, let's just promote them. It's easier than finding somebody from the outside, or maybe it feels easier to hire for that entry level role. If you're not developing talent, if you're not committing to helping people learn and grow, then it doesn't make sense to push them into positions for which they're not prepared, right? So you want to invest in internal mobility by making that commitment to developing talent, teaching, coaching, providing those professional development opportunities. I also want you to resolve to be relevant. Every one of us has filled out a form at some time or another that asked us irrelevant questions where we just wrote not applicable, NA, right? Or we skipped over, they asked us the same question 3 times and we're wondering, why do they need to know my name 3 times? Why are they asking for my social security number again, right? I want you to make sure that your applications speak highly of your organization, that your application really suits the position. So if I'm applying for an entry-level position, you don't ask me about my supervisory experience. And, so you really want to try to customize these tools, your application and your interview questions, be relevant. When you give somebody a form that has lots of irrelevant or not applicable questions or content, it tells them that you're sloppy. It tells them that you don't care. It sends a very bad impression of your organization. All right, let's talk about recruitment. I want you to think about, how do I make applying for a job here a concierge experience, right? A 5-star experience. If I'm booking a hotel on a hotel booking site, am I looking for 3-star hotels, 4-star hotels, or 5-star hotels? You have a different expectation, right? If you're looking for a 5-star hotel versus a 3-star hotel. I want the process of applying for a job to feel good. I want the people who walk away who didn't get the job to still have a good impression of your agency. How can you do that, right? One is by being responsive and letting them know where they stand. I want you to think about stopping the collection of resumes. Resumes are these pieces of paper that say different things, often written by people who are not the applicants, often with language people have taken off of resume builder websites. So there's lots of strange, very convoluted language. Doesn't really tell you what the person did, what they know, what they can do, what their interests are. Resumes are a terrible way to evaluate skill sets. So I want you to break away from that. I also want you to think about quieting some of the noise that happens when you're in recruitment mode. That noise comes from when you research an applicant. So somebody applies for a job and you go on LinkedIn and you look them up. Oh, this is where they, oh my God, look what job, oh, they had that job for 3 months. That's not good. That's not good, right? You find them on social media and you become engrossed in their life and trying to figure out who they are. I want you to think about not doing that ever again. And when people apply for a job, I want you to ask them relevant questions and I want you to evaluate their suitability based on their answers to the questions and what their references say. I want those to be the first 2 things you use. I want you to proceed without knowing what they look like, their faith background, which is something you might discover if you research them on social media, their race, their gender. Those are things you don't need to know at that first level of screening. I want you to evaluate them based on their skills, their interests, and what their references have to say, right? About their productivity, right? About their work ethic. And really push aside all that noise created when you start to research people on social media. I want you to speed up the time from when they apply to when you answer, from when they express an interest in you and you let them know that you received their reply. Thank you for applying on the very same day. The next day, day after that, here's the next step in our process, right? Or I'm so sorry, but you're not going to be moving on to the next phase of the process, but we were so grateful you took the time to apply. We wish you all the best. And, just the kindest, most thoughtful reply you can. So they're not sitting there waiting to hear from you with lots of anxiety that is always associated when somebody and arises when somebody's looking for a job. So, for years, what we've done is we've posted announcements, we collect resumes for 30 days, and then we open up the box of resumes and we take a look. We need to stop doing that. The best candidates in the marketplace right now are finding jobs in 2 or 3 days. And so by the time you let them know that, hey, your candidacy looks promising, they've already found a better job. So you've lost that opportunity. You will not wind up with the cream of the crop for open positions if you delay responding to those initial applications. Something else you need to start doing immediately, if you're not already, is you need to post compensation on every job announcement. We need to be more transparent about compensation. People waste so much time applying for jobs that they imagine pay very high salaries, only to discover later on in the process that it pays less than they're making now. And so they wouldn't even consider it. We need to post compensation upfront. The other thing I want you to do is to be explicit about what flexibility means. I don't think I've seen a job announcement in the last 5 years that doesn't include the word flexible or flexibility. Employers are quick to boast that we are flexible. Well, what did flexibility mean in your agency in 2019? Here at the Nonprofit Risk Management Center, what flexibility meant was that you could start work at 8:30, 9, or 9:30. And I honestly thought I was super flexible. Like, how flexible is that, right? When we moved into this office years ago, I told my staff they could all pick out the paint color for their offices. They could paint their offices different colors, which they did. My daughter brought me back to reality and she said, Mom, you need to be real with yourself. She said, you gave them 6 paint colors to choose from and they could all pick from those 6 paint colors. You didn't let them paint their office any color. You picked 6 colors that were acceptable to you and you let everybody choose from the 6. And she was right. So my concept of flexibility was very narrow back in 2019 and before that. But now flexibility means, can I pick my own hours, right? Can I decide where I want to work from? you need to really take the time to define what flexibility means when you are announcing a position. In terms of supervision and really trying to experiment, be more innovative, and try some new things and be fearless as you supervise people. I want you to think about how to be uncomfortably transparent. I want you to think about ways in which you could share information that you don't share currently, and even identify what are the things that people don't know are happening. What are the things I'm hiding, I'm keeping from people? Am I keeping it from them because I don't want them to be distracted? Why am I keeping information from them? And, start to poke a little bit at that and ask. And one of the great questions you should be asking the people that report to you is there anything you need to know, want to know that I could share? And every once in a while, I just had a meeting the other day with a staff member who said something about, it'd be interesting to see the report that goes to the finance committee because it would help me XYZ. And oh my gosh, how easy is that? And she said, I know it's on the network somewhere, but it would be helpful if you kind of put it in front of me, if you just kind of reminded me that it was available. I said, no problem. It's going to take me a couple of seconds to just add her to my distribution list for the finance committee report. She's interested. It may help her, it may not, no harm. It's about being more transparent. And then I also want you to think about trust. In order for people to trust you, which is something we all want as leaders, you have to be trusting of others. So trust is reciprocal. And the benefits for a trusting workplace are incredible, but you have to be trusting first. You have to trust other people, and you have to be transparent. You have to be willing to be vulnerable as well, to show that you trust them. You trust others with information. And as you supervise people, I want you to think about ways to encourage risk taking. How can you encourage members of your team, your direct reports, to take risks, to do things that may not work out without fear of repercussions, without fear of being punished? Being willing to take risk. It's part of growing on the job. It's part of learning and growing on the job. And then when you make mistakes and when you do things that don't work out, when you fail, I want you to be the first one who raises your hand to say, you know what? You really messed up. I can't believe I made that mistake, but I did. I'm human. Just proof positive that I'm a human being. I made that mistake and I'm trying to understand why. And I'm thinking about ways to avoid it in the future, but I just wanted you guys to know that I made this mistake. And, I'm still here. As you think about employee engagement, which is such an important topic for all of us, because we know that at any given moment, some number of team members are getting ready to bounce because they will be offered something better. It's out there. It's just a matter of how soon that offer comes their way. I want you to really deepen engagement by always asking people how they're doing, right? How are you doing? So whether you're convening a weekly staff meeting, a one-on-one meeting, whatever those staff check-ins are, make sure that you're starting with, how are you doing? That shows that you care about their well-being first and foremost, and that you also care about their work, right? You want them to be successful in the workplace, but first and foremost, you care about them as a human being. I want you to think about whether you can conduct some pulse surveys. Those are those quick anonymous surveys. How did this work for you? Was this staff meeting productive? Was this all hands meeting helpful? What was your takeaway? What was your number one takeaway from the conversation we had today? Anonymous pulse surveys, right? I also want you to think about psychological safety. There's an excellent article on psychological safety on our website. So if you go to nonprofitrisk.org and you search for psychological safety, you'll find this fantastic article written by a former member of my team, Erin Glockner, and it's featured in an issue of our magazine, which is all about workplace culture and risk, kind of the relationship between the two. And psychological safety is where people feel safe taking risks in the workplace. They don't fear repercussions for speaking up, for disagreeing with their boss, for expressing a contrary view. I also want you to think about another idea. And again, I know that there's a possibility only 5% of this content feels really, really doable right at this moment, but I'm convinced there's at least 5%, there may be more. Another idea is to start over with performance management. Many of us have taken our annual performance evaluation process and tweaked it, right? We've tweaked it. We've added a question, we've taken off a question, we've reduced the number of scores, so instead of 0 to 10, it's 1 to 5. We've done a lot of tweaking. I want you to think about redoing it from scratch, starting over. Nobody likes annual performance reviews. Employers and supervisors don't like giving them. Employees hate receiving them. No one likes them. So how do we change this up? I think we start changing it up by figuring out what people want to get out of it. What do you want to get out of it? We need to ask members of our team. Some people want help reaching their career goals. Some want problem-solving help. Some want to make sure they're focused on the right goals, that their goals are aligned with your goals. Some want to improve their performance. Some want to know if they're eligible for a raise, a performance, or a merit increase. Some want to know if they did enough to continue as a member of the team. People want different things. And when we do these performance reviews without knowing what people want, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice. All right, a couple of thoughts on onboarding. I want you to think about these 4 C's. Onboarding is a phase in the employment relationship that we often neglect. We hurry it up, we rush through it. I want you to think about these 4 aspects of onboarding: compliance, making sure that people know the rules; clarification, right? Clarity is so important. What is expected of me? Culture is incredibly important. That's how do things work around here? And then connection. Who do I need to know? Where do I need to go to do this, to understand this, to get help? These are 4 things that should be kind of guideposts for your onboarding. I want you to think about that. And then on this next slide, I have a few onboarding best practices. Start early. People love receiving a little care package before their first day of work. Make sure that you've got an onboarding plan that covers the first day, the first week, the first month, maybe the first quarter. Our onboarding plan for employees covers 3 months. And every time we hire somebody new, we change it up. We try to improve it. We're constantly focused on better practices. Let's not use that onboarding plan we used 3 years ago. That was before the pandemic. Let's come up with something new that makes more sense today. I do think pairing people up, a new person with a veteran employee, is really helpful. Oftentimes new employees just want somebody they can talk to and ask the dumb questions. Is it okay if I wear this? Is it okay if I answer the phone this way? Is it okay if, when my supervisor asks me to call somebody, does that mean email them, or do I have to call them? What does that mean, right? Does she mind being interrupted? That's a question that new members of my team often ask. When Melanie's busy working, is it okay to just walk in, and do I need to knock first? Does she like to be interrupted? Things like that are so important, and often a buddy can help convey those ideas. And then the last thing on this list is to just stop and reflect and ask, what is a new person here? What's our latest new hire likely to feel about us after they finished onboarding? You may be already asking what people feel and what their experience is from onboarding, but how does it feel? Are they exhausted? Are they excited? Frustrated? Are they demoralized? How does someone feel? And how do you turn that around so those emotions are positive, energized, excited, eager for the next thing? All right, I have a few closing thoughts before we wrap up. The first one is from this book that I'm actually reading right now. The book is titled Redesigning Work: How to Transform Your Organization and Make Hybrid Work for Everyone. And it's by Linda Grattan. And I'm halfway through this book, and it's really, really interesting. And I'm learning a lot. One of the things she talks about in the book is the difference between explicit and tacit knowledge. And this was new to me. I had not heard this before. She says that not all knowledge is the same. Some knowledge is explicit and objective. It's easy to write down, it's easy to access, and it moves with ease across an organization. So this is the information that we find in policies, in books, and materials that we can give somebody. So this is really important knowledge that we want to share with new people, and we want to be skilled at sharing explicit knowledge. But she says there's much valuable knowledge in your organization that is tacit knowledge. Tacit knowledge, she says, is insights, know-how, mental models, ways of framing, all held in the minds of your colleagues. And she says that tacit knowledge lives in relationships. And the way it gets exchanged is when two people get together and they trust one another and they share information. And so that's what's happening in this photo that I've included on the site is two coworkers are sharing information that probably isn't going to be found in that employee handbook or that policy manual. Tacit knowledge. I want you to think about recognizing the difference between these two and then thinking about how you can foster the sharing and transfer of tacit knowledge. How are you supporting relationships and trust in the workplace? And a great source of inspiration for that is this wonderful book titled The Business of Friendship by Shasta Nelson. And this is all about why friendships in the workplace are so important to individual happiness and contentment and engagement and organizational success. Why friendships in the workplace are absolutely vital. And this kind of flies in the face of what many of us were taught back in the 80s and 90s, which was you shouldn't be friends with the people that work for you. I was told that when I was in my 20s by my first boss. Your employees should respect you. Your coworkers should respect you. They're not your friends. Shasta Nelson says no. She says all of the things that we're afraid of that might happen if we become friends with coworkers are going to happen anyways. These risks are real, right? We could have no friends at work, but that doesn't protect us from jealousy, gossip, drama, or feeling left out. She said all of those things happen anyways. And she says that the number one indicator of employee engagement is whether you have a best friend at work. And so as leaders, we need to encourage people to be friends, to be friendly, to become friends, to develop great friendships. That's where that engagement spikes. People that are engaged are those who have a best friend at work. And that's where we start to see that sharing of tacit knowledge, which is so important. I mentioned earlier this idea of a risk portfolio. You could have a risk portfolio in risk management, but you could also have one in HR, right? Where you're thinking about taking some steps that feel kind of safe, taking some steps, changing some things that are a bit of an experiment, and then doing at least one thing that's quite bold. So you've got a portfolio instead of having all of your eggs in one basket. So I want you to think about that. Of all the ideas I've shared today, are there some that you would say, yeah, that represents an experiment for us. We're willing to try that. Let's give that a try. And is there something that feels very radical, revolutionary, completely different from the way you do business now that might be worth doing because you could learn from that? There could be some valuable learning. And then the theme for this presentation is all about learning to be fearless. Another way to be fearless is to think about what would happen if Amazon, if one of the biggest companies on the planet bought our biggest competitor or suddenly got into the business that we're in. What would they do? How would they compete against us and be successful at it? What would they do? A company that's really grounded on innovation and trying things that many people told them would never work, right? Would be impossible. You'll never make money selling books online. There are all these bookstores. People like to go to bookstores. You'll never. And then when they moved into other types of products, well, what are they doing? They're trying to compete with Costco and Target and Walmart. Exactly. What if Amazon? I know it sounds fanciful, but what if Amazon bought your largest competitor? What if Amazon set up an organization like yours and tried to compete with you? What would they do? And then I also want you to think about, what are 3 organizations that you really admire? Maybe there are other community action agencies, people that you've met, leaders that you've met at NCAP conferences and events, or maybe they're just people that you know working in other industries or in the nonprofit sector. Who are your worthy rivals? Who are your worthy rivals? And that concept is discussed beautifully in Simon Sinek's book, The Infinite Game. Pick 3 organizations that are doing some really interesting things in terms of human resources. And I want you to reflect on whether it would be worth studying those practices and maybe adopting some of them as your own. So here are some of the books that I've mentioned today: Redesigning Work, which I'm still reading, The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek, The Business of Friendship. It's a really interesting read. It's an easy read, fun read. It kind of blew me away. I had no idea about this concept of the best friend at work. And then one of my favorite books of the last year has been Think Again by Adam Grant. It's got me rethinking lots of things. And it's just a great place to remind us that things that we believe are true now may not be true tomorrow, and things that were true a couple of years ago may not be true today. And we need to constantly update how we think about things and how we operate and how we lead, to keep up with what's happening around us. So that's it for me. I'm going to turn it back over to Aaron and others on the team. Thank you for having me. And again, you have my contact information, so I'm absolutely happy to take one-on-one questions anytime you have them.
All right. Thank you so much, Melanie. I want to just conclude by reiterating a few things. Number one, please take up Melanie's invitation to contact her at any time. Our whole network is a member of the Nonprofit Risk Management Center, and they have so many great resources and so much insight to share. So, so make use of it, please. I look forward to the day when Melanie, calls me and says, community action is driving me crazy because they call all the time. Like, let's do that. So please make use of that resource. And for those of you that are on the webinar today, I said at the outset, this is being recorded. And so we will be sharing it out. I would like to just recommend that everyone share the recording with your colleagues, with your HR folks, with your CEO or your executive director, and watch it a few times, because there is so much information here, so much to think about. Really take a few passes at it and think about where you can get started. As Melanie said, you don't have to do 100% of it, but maybe start with 5%, because there's so many great ideas that that we can all begin to implement and think about how we change. So again, I want to thank our presenter, Melanie Herman from the Nonprofit Risk Management Center. Thank her for her partnership and for her presentation today. And thank all of you in Community Action for all the work that you do every day for our communities and for your participation today. Have a great day. Take care. Bye, everyone.